Welcome to the Arroyo Seco Weekend podcast, a chance to get to know some of the players, makers, and thinkers who are coming together for a spectacular weekend in beautiful Pasadena. On today's podcast, we'll meet jazz great Benny Maupin to learn about his life as a longtime Pasadena resident and devout Buddhist.
Once I started chanting, I noticed that little things didn't bother me anymore.
We also sit with Paul Petrunia, the founder of Pasadena-based architecture and design website Archinect.
We believe that architects have the tools to do a lot more than just design and build.
And finally, star chef Bruce Kalman calls in from parts unknown to talk about his Pasadena restaurant union and how a New Jersey guy became one of the West Coast's top chefs.
I started on one coast and ended on the other.
So stick around for all that and more on the Saturday edition of the Arroyo Seco Weekend podcast. Thanks for listening.
We're in the city of North Hollywood, California. We're in the SGI USA Buddhist Center.
That's Benny Maupin, the famed musician who played sax, flute, and bass clarinet for jazz giants like Miles Davis, Herbie Hancock, and Horace Silver. His own band, the Bennie Maupin Ensemble, plays Arroyo Seco Weekend on Saturday. Maupin began practicing Buddhism in 1972 when he was working with Hancock and the famed Mwandishi Sextet. It was a time of musical experimentation when jazz was evolving from the manic energy of free jazz into the groovier funk, blues, rock, and Latin-inspired rhythms of jazz fusion. Maupin was at the heart of the movement. He had played on the Miles Davis album Bitches Brew in 1970, considered by many to be the album that started the jazz fusion movement. It was also a time for spiritual experimentation, with many in the jazz community turning to Eastern philosophies.
I was first introduced to this practice by Buster Williams' wife. Her name is Ronnie. And it was at a time when I was working with Herbie Hancock in the group known as the Mwandishi Sextet. Ronnie came to visit us during a break from one of our sets. She was just glowing and in a really bright life condition, very happy. And she explained to us that recently she had started chanting Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, had started to attend the Buddhist meetings, and she was feeling much better. And I think we were all searching for something, but it's hard to know exactly what. But I think inwardly we all felt that we needed something. So we decided, once we were exposed to this, to give it a try. Then from that point on, Buster encouraged me to just chant with him sometimes, since we would be on the road. And I learned more by going to discussion meetings. And as a consequence, I got to hear the experiences from people who chant. So that was 1972.
Maupin was born in Detroit and was living in New York when Buddhism came into his life. Like many of his peers, by the mid-70s, he was drawn to the West Coast, specifically Southern California, where he has practiced his faith and his instruments for the past 40 years.
Well, when I actually started, I was traveling. We were on the road a lot. And I was in transition, moving from New York to where I live now, basically Altadena, Pasadena area. I came under good circumstances. I was actually working with one of my mentors, the great composer and pianist, Horace Silver. He groomed me to be a part of his band. I worked with him for almost 2 years. And I love the weather. I love being near the ocean. And then I came back again, and I was working with Herbie Hancock. And I just started to meet more people who lived here, who loved the music. And eventually I met a woman that inspired me. And we became very close, and eventually we were married. Because at that time I had a son that was born when I was very young. I was actually 22, and his mother died at a very young age, and so he was living with my parents in Detroit. And I was able to, for the very first time, bring him from Detroit to California to live with the woman that I married. She already had 2 kids, so I became like the father of 3 kids and a traveling musician. But, it just changed the level of my thinking.
This new California life not only changed what Maupin thought about his family, it also altered how he felt about his music.
I think, moving here definitely changed my thinking, and which is going to automatically change the way you express yourself musically. So the things that I was exposed to here through the art, through the music, of course, the film industry, and then moving here to L.A., I got to be with some of the greats who are here, who are gone now, the great conductor and composer, Gerald Wilson, the incredible saxophonist and multi-woodwind specialist, Buddy Collette. I discovered that Eric Dolphy was from L.A., that many people don't even know that. The great Charles Mingus. So in being here, I got to meet some of their friends and some of their colleagues who told me about them. So I'm learning about the history of L.A., and how vibrant L.A. was at a certain time in the history of jazz music, especially.
Of course, L.A. is experiencing another historic time in jazz right now, with the success of younger musicians like Kamasi Washington and Terrence Martin. For the first time since the 70s, L.A. is a hotbed for fresh jazz sounds.
The fact that there is a renaissance going on here in L.A. is something that makes me extremely happy, because the musicians like Kamasi Washington, Terrence Martin, I met them when they were going to high school. They were just getting started. But now they're leading the way in terms of their generation. They're making recordings. They're doing a host of things that would not have happened if it hadn't been for some of the other great people around who have nurtured them.
At Arroyo Seco, Maupin will step on stage with players from the Los Angeles jazz community. Their ages vary, but their talent bridges the generation gap.
I'm playing with musicians that I met here in L.A. There's a percussionist who plays with me. His name is Munyungo Jackson. And Munyungo is a regular performer and musician with Stevie Wonder. But I get him to play with me whenever he's available. And he's been in every band that I've had since the 70s, and I moved here. And then I met a guy in my community. His name is David Arnay. He's my pianist. And then I'm on the faculty of Cal Arts. And I met this young man before he graduated. His name is Zephyr Avalon. And Zephyr is a bassist. And my drummer is a guy who's an SGI member. He's a Buddhist. And he's also one of my neighbors. His name is Kenny Sarah. And I met a young woman, and she plays cello, and she sings. Her name is Shauna Tucker. So she's also going to be with me. That's the combination for the Arroyo Seco Music Weekends held on June 24th.
On a nondescript intersection of La Mata Park on the east end of Pasadena, there sits a small one-story office structure that houses one of architecture's most important online resources, Archinect.com. Founded in 1997 by architecture student Paul Petrunia, the site has turned into a central hub for architects.
Archinect means something different to almost everybody. Some people come for news coverage to find out what's going on with in the world of architecture every day. Some people come for our featured editorial content, which is not so time-specific, but it's kind of a more in-depth, more thoughtful look at issues in architecture, ranging from very practical issues to the very, very esoteric kind of margin of architecture.
Stepping into the office, it looks like any other lean new media company, fueled by wickedly strong coffee that Petunia prepares at a small counter built into the back wall. The rest of that wall features a floor-to-ceiling shelf loaded full of design and architecture books. Petunia steps to one section of the wall and pulls on the shelves, revealing a hidden entrance to a small room where he records a weekly podcast where Petunia and his colleagues discuss the week's architecture news. And then there is the occasional live episode called Next Up, recorded at various venues across the country in front of a live audience. Archinect will be hosting its latest Next Up live podcast as part of Arroyo Seco Weekend, a partnership with local artist Jimenez Lai, who designed the fieldhouse structure as a venue to host the podcast interviews.
Each Next Up series addresses a very specific topic relevant to the location and the context in which we host the event. So for Arroyo Seco, we're wanting to look at two main themes. One theme being the way that Pasadena has grown to be a modernist architectural destination. And also, we are going to be speaking to a number of people about the art of temporary and festival architecture. There are a lot of amazing architects out there right now doing non-traditional work. And part of that non-traditional work is the work of installations, temporary structures, and event-specific architecture. So the people that will be a part of our conversations not only do that work, but they also do work in Pasadena. So we're going to be talking to them mostly about their work that they do in that area, but also how it relates to living in and working around Pasadena.
That's right. Pasadena has become a thriving hub for architecture and architecture lovers.
If you asked me 10 years ago if I was going to end up in Pasadena, I would have confidently said I would not have, because I'm Canadian originally. I've kind of gradually made my way down the West Coast. I landed in LA literally right on the beach in Venice, and have slowly moved east in LA through Hollywood, spent a lot of time in Silver Lake. And then after having kids, we decided to move to Pasadena, where my wife's mom has been living for a long time. Since living in Pasadena, I have grown to really love it. The architecture specifically is so eclectic, and there's such an amazing collection of mid-century modern gems just tucked away all over the city. So the city not only has this really amazing architectural history and this cultural history, it's also a beautiful place that's just lush. It's got amazing hiking and mountain biking trails. And the growth in this city in the last couple of years has really been quite surprising.
The name Archinect comes from combining the words architecture and connection. Not only does the site connect architects from all over the world, it is also helping to connect architecture lovers to Pasadena. With the Next Up podcast at Arroyo Seco, Petrunia is hoping to make another connection, this time between music lovers, food lovers, and his own love of architecture.
What's unique and quite exciting about our event at Arroyo Seco is that the vast majority of the festival goers are not going to be architects, but the reality is that they all deal with architecture every day. Architecture shouldn't be a private club. The way that we will be discussing architecture will likely be more accessible. We're not going to get into the kind of stereotypical architecture speak that can oftentimes happen in our podcast and also just in architecture lectures in general. We're going to address these issues for a wider audience in a way that makes everybody listening realize that architecture is important to everybody.
Thank you for calling Union Restaurant in Old Town, Pasadena. We are open for dinner 7 nights a week.
Where are you right now?
I'm actually not able to talk about it.
That's Bruce Kalman, the head chef of Union, the gastropub in Old Town, Pasadena that has been earning rave reviews since it opened in 2014. Bruce is calling in from an undisclosed location where he is no doubt working on his next culinary project, the latest to add to a list that also includes Mead & Company Pasta Bar in downtown LA's Grand Central Market. Other Kalman restaurants have been the Churchill in West Hollywood and the Misfit in Santa Monica. But while he's been on a trajectory east through the Los Angeles area over the past few years, his life has been on a journey west. Call it Culinary Manifest Destiny, starting at a pizza parlor in New Jersey.
Growing up in Jersey, you eat a lot of Americanized Chinese food, Americanized Italian food, like diner food. And I think what's good about it is that's food that's like for your soul in a way, especially as I got older. It's my comfort food, basically. But it's really cool because I can really bring a lot of those flavors and that soul into other things that I'm doing that are finer dining, let's say.
That combination of quick comfort food with finer dining is what makes Kalman's cuisine ideal for a festival like Arroyo Seco, where the biggest challenge is delivering high-quality food while making sure the lines don't get too long.
For me, it's more about bringing the soulful food to the plate and adding the fine dining flair to it. And when I say soul, I mean depth of flavor, things that remind you of your childhood, and just food that you eat that kind of hugs you from the inside out. That's what I always talk about.
And what will Kalman be serving at Arroyo Seco?
We're making our porchetta sandwich, and that is like, if you do it proper, a roast or a braise is always, something that's going to have a lot of flavor, and you're going to eat it and think about. It could either remind you of Reading Terminal Station pork sandwiches in Philly, or it could remind you of being in Italy.
Like those other locations, California is a place with its own distinct flavor, one defined by fresh ingredients that Kalman and other West Coast chefs have championed for years.
Californians really understand great ingredients and food that tastes great because the ingredients are so high quality and fresh. But one of the things I've noticed compared to other markets is whenever I do a dinner or an event, people don't eat as much as everywhere else. It's really funny.
Fortunately for Kalman, folks still eat enough to keep his restaurants bustling. Union is packed on most nights, and a primetime reservation can take a while to book. Perhaps it's because Kalman is offering something unique to the area, something that locals have been waiting for. It's all part of the city's continued growth, one delicious meal at a time.
The first year that we were open, there wasn't a day that went by that somebody didn't say to me, "Thank you for opening in Pasadena." So that was nice to hear, and that pretty much solidified that we made a good decision.
That's it for the Saturday episode of the Arroyo Seco Weekend podcast. We hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you'll have a great time today in Pasadena. To learn more about the festival, take some time to explore the Arroyo Seco mobile app. We'll be back tomorrow with more of the folks working to make Arroyo Seco Weekend a spectacular experience for all the senses, including the uplifting sound of the Mowglis, the great taste of kombucha couple Jay and Joe Dean from Fine Feathers Kombucha, and fragrance designer Andre Barnwell, whose scent lab is a sweet-smelling spotlight at Arroyo Seco. This podcast was produced for Arroyo Seco Weekend by CuriousContent.Studio. Thanks for listening.